Mr. Poloz was born in Oshawa, Ontario, and graduated from Queen's University in 1978 with a bachelor's degree in economics. He received a master's degree in economics in 1979 and a PhD in economics in 1982, both from the University of Western Ontario. In 2017, he was awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Trent University. Mr. Poloz spent 14 years at the Bank of Canada early in his career before joining the private sector. After his departure from the bank in 1995, he spent 4 years at BCA Research, where he served as managing editor of the flagship publication, the International Bank Credit Analyst. Mr. Poloz joined Export Development Canada, EDC, in 1999 as Vice President and Chief Economist. He spent 2 years as Senior Vice President, Financing, with responsibility for all of EDC's lending programs. In January 2011, he was appointed President and Chief Executive Officer of EDC, a position he held until his appointment as Governor of the Bank of Canada in June of 2013. As Governor, he is Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Bank and a member of the Board of Directors of the Bank for International Settlements, BIS. He is also the current Chair of the BIS Audit Committee and former Chair of the Consultative Council for the Americas. We welcome you, Mr. Poloz.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's lovely to be here. Bonsoir tout le monde. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici à Moncton, Dieppe. It's always fun to come back to a town I've spent a lot of time in the past and have some great friends here. The Canadian economy has been doing quite well overall for about a year now. Yes, growth has been a little bit choppy and regionally uneven. But the economy as a whole has finally recovered from the global financial crisis of 2008 and the 2014 collapse in oil prices. Inflation, it's close to target. The economy is operating at its capacity, and unemployment is very low. Now, I know that this assessment will sound a little too rosy for some Canadians. Oil-producing regions continue to adjust to low prices and deal with shipping constraints. We face daily uncertainty around the future of NAFTA. And people are nervous. They're nervous about digital technology and about how it will disrupt industries, perhaps leading to widespread job losses. So that's what I want to talk about today. Digital disruption and how it's affecting our economy and, of course, our monetary policy. Ces bouleversements sont très rapides. Il n'est donc pas étonnant que les gens s'inquiètent. En les aidant à comprendre comment les changements technologiques se produisent, j'espère que leurs craintes s'apaisent. Nous sommes déjà passés par là plusieurs fois et nous en avons beaucoup bénéficié. Au fond, si le rythme des changements est sans précédent, le processus d'ajustement, lui, n'a rien de nouveau. Now, I'm not here to deliver an academic lecture. Relief, right? The Bank of Canada is trying to use plain and simple language as much as possible. In fact, we are launching a new publication called, listen to this, The Economy Plain and Simple. Those things don't usually go together, do they? But the economy, plain and simple. It aims to explain important economic concepts in a way that's accessible for anybody who's interested. I invite you to check it out tomorrow on the bank's website. So starting tomorrow, we'll have this thing. There will be an article tomorrow on how international trade works to the benefit of Canadians that I hope will be very widely read. Now, when we use the term technological disruption, we have in mind how technological breakthroughs can literally revolutionize the way people work. with implications for the entire economy. Now consider the changes that arrived with the internal combustion engine or electricity. Or take a more recent example. Consider the disruption over the past 20 years caused by the globalization of manufacturing. Avec la mondialisation, les entreprises ont fragmenté le processus de production. La fabrication des pièces a été répartie dans différents pays. Elles ont réuni leurs fournisseurs dans des chaînes de logistique internationales. Et grâce à la mondialisation, les biens sont devenus moins chers dans les économies avancées. Et le pouvoir d'achat a donc augmenté dans ces économies. Aussi, la mondialisation a sorti plus d'1 milliard de personnes de la misère partout dans le monde. Il n'y a pas de doute, dans l'ensemble, la mondialisation a eu des effets très positifs pour la majorité des gens. Now, overall, Canada's economy did well because of the disruption of globalization, not in spite of it. And there's no reason to expect the disruption due to digital technology to be any different. Technological change tends to follow a predictable pattern. At the outset, entrepreneurs, business leaders find ways to apply a new technology in the workplace. Consider, for example, robots on a manufacturing assembly line. A disruptive breakthrough such as this tends to spread throughout the industry. So in the year 2000, Canadian companies were using about 1,000 industrial robots. Now by 2016, that number had jumped to more than 25,000 industrial robots. And most of these were being used in the automobile manufacturing business. Now, the process that follows technological change was aptly summarized by Joseph Schumpeter when he used the term creative destruction. Now, on the destruction side of the coin, new technologies clearly make certain jobs obsolete. Today's robots are doing what some assembly line workers used to do. And this entails a significant human cost for the people who are directly involved. And even those who are not involved, they worry that their job or their industry will be the next to become obsolete. And it's crucial to keep this human cost in mind, and I'll come back to it in a few minutes. First, though, let me talk about the other side of creative destruction, the creative side. New technologies allow companies to produce more at a lower cost, and that can lead to the creation of entirely new industries. In doing so, the technologies create value that is distributed throughout the economy through several channels. Now, one channel, perhaps the most obvious one, is higher profits. Now, investors certainly see that potential in today's digital disruption. The market cap of 5 of the most powerful technology companies is now $4.2 trillion US. Well, that's a pretty big number. That's almost double the market cap of the entire TSX. Now, these gains accrue to many people, not just to those companies. They accrue to many people through their pension plans or their RRSPs. The second channel is higher real wages or inflation-adjusted wages. Because new technology makes companies more productive, it can lead to higher wages, or it may also mean lower prices for the goods and services. Just think about how inexpensive a quality television is today compared with 10 years ago. And the price index for video equipment has fallen by an average of 9% per year, every year, for the last 10 years. Pretty soon they'll be free, right? Or companies might instead produce a better product for the same price. We see this, which means a lower quality adjusted price. Consider all the digital technology that now goes into a new car, making each model year more sophisticated than the last. So whether through higher wages or lower prices, our purchasing power rises. The third channel is the creation of new types of jobs.
So before you can put robots on an assembly line, you need people. People to design, to build, to program, and maintain the robots. Driverless cars will need designers and maintenance workers, as well as people to create systems to control traffic. So the new jobs that are created, they tend to be very well paying. And the workers earning these salaries spend them. Yeah. They spend them on everything that you might expect: food, cars, clothes, housing, travel. Now, this spending creates the fourth channel of distribution by supporting jobs and growth in other completely unrelated sectors of the economy, such as construction, renovation, maintenance, manufacturing, and tourism. And then there's the fifth channel. The fifth channel is through which technological benefits are distributed. It may be the most powerful. As new technologies become more widespread, they create opportunities for growth far beyond their original setting. Well, today, digital technologies are spreading rapidly throughout the Canadian economy, enabling growth in all kinds of industries. So from this brief illustration, you can see that the effects of new technology on the economy are actually quite complex. Certainly, they go far beyond that initial disruption experienced by the displaced worker. So let's look at some of the ways that Canadians are embracing digital technologies. Now, one way to get a rough measure of this process is to look at the sector that we call computer system design and related services. That's a Statistics Canada defined sector. Computer system design and related services. Well, okay, over the last 2 years, the number of jobs in this sector has grown by more than 20%. That's 5 times faster than total employment for Canada as a whole. Output from this sector has expanded by more than 7% every year for the past 5 years. Today, it accounts for close to 2% of output in the Canadian economy. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, so let's put it into context. What this means is that the computer system design sector is already more important to the economy than the auto sector and the aerospace sector combined. And it's growing by 7% per year. Now, that's because in many of these digital jobs, labor and brain power make up almost all of the value of the product. There's very little automation involved in those sectors. Now, these jobs are showing up throughout Canada. Earlier this year, I was in Victoria. It's one of the best parts of my job. I get to travel everywhere and talk to people. Earlier this year, I was in Victoria, where there are as many people working in IT today as there are in government. And Victoria, I'll just remind you, is the capital city. Okay. All right. So it's amazing what's happened there. BC, along with Ontario and Quebec, is also a hub for Canada's video game industry. Now, I know those of you with kids at home know that that's an industry. It's a real industry. One of the largest in the world here in Canada. More than 21,000 people work directly in the gaming industry today. And by the way, their average salary is more than $75,000 a year. Le Canada arrive maintenant au 3e rang mondial pour la concentration de chercheurs dans le domaine de l'intelligence artificielle et les projets d'investissement direct étrangers au pays concernent de plus en plus des activités de pointe, la recherche-développement et les technologies de l'information et de communication, par exemple. Even individual households are embracing the opportunities from digital technology. Preliminary estimates from StatsCan show that the business of offering household accommodation, basically through a service such as Airbnb, has grown roughly 7 times over the past 2 years to around $1.8 billion. Now, many of the jobs in the digital sector are located in Canada's 3 most populous provinces. However, the digital nature of the work means that places like New Brunswick, with its high quality of life, relatively low cost of living, skilled workers, and growing number of innovative firms can also compete. Now, as many of you know, Fredericton has become a hub for cybersecurity research, unfortunately a very fast-growing area. Large international companies and domestic firms are attracted to the researchers and the ecosystem in and around the University of New Brunswick. Now, New Brunswick's population recently began increasing again as people find opportunities here, including in the tech sectors. Since the end of 2014, New Brunswick has seen solid gains in the employment rates for youth as well as prime-age workers, those between 25 and 54. And the youth participation rate, an indicator that I watch particularly closely, has risen here, even while it has fallen in other provinces. So more youths participating in the workforce. Wage growth is also encouraging. The bank's own wage measure has shown even stronger growth in New Brunswick than in many other provinces since the end of 2014. So all these signs show that the province is taking advantage of the opportunities provided by a strong economy and technological progress. But we know that these statistics only scratch the surface of the effects of new tech on the economy. And that's because the technology is enabling growth everywhere, including in industries that have not traditionally been considered high-tech. So a few examples. So it's becoming common to see driverless trucks at oil sands operations. Almost all large-scale farms in Saskatchewan today are using tractors guided by satellite. Drones can now assess the health of crops or monitor your assets at the bottom of the ocean. Jet engines can provide performance data in real time while they're flying, allowing airlines to maintain the aircraft more efficiently, maximizing its time in the air. So it's just a few examples that show how new tech can create value in diverse industries. Now let's go back, though, to the other side of the coin and talk about the workers whose jobs become obsolete through technological change. Their immediate concern is to find a new job, and many will look to some sort of training or education to help them become qualified for another line of work. Now, unfortunately, the skills gap is often portrayed in exaggerated terms. For example, how can a long-term factory worker be trained to write computer code? That's the kind of article we might read. This only serves to discourage people. Rappelez-vous le processus de transformation technologique que j'ai décrit plus tôt et la façon dont les avantages se répartissent dans l'économie. C'est vrai, la transformation technologique crée de nouveaux types d'emplois dans les secteurs de pointe, mais les nouveaux revenus générés créent aussi des emplois dans d'autres secteurs de l'économie. So right now, there are 462,000 job vacancies in Canada. I'm going to say that again because I want you to memorize that. Right now, there are 462,000 job vacancies, empty jobs in Canada. Now, the details might surprise you even more. Over the past 2 years, the number of vacancies have grown, and the vacancies in the sector that includes computer system design, well, they've grown by about 8,000 jobs. Now, you'd expect that in a growing sector like I've described. But over the same time frame, construction job vacancies have increased by 10,000. Transportation and warehousing vacancies have grown by 14,000 jobs. These are vacancies, folks, not jobs, but jobs with nobody in them yet. And manufacturing vacancies have increased by more than 14,000 in that same 2-year period. Now, these numbers suggest that technological advances are driving growth and creating opportunities very broadly. They also imply that we need to do a much better job of matching people with job openings. I often hear from business leaders about how hard it is for them to find workers with a specific set of skills. Yes, Canada needs more people who can write computer code. But we also need people with skill sets that may not be too far removed from the ones that are being displaced. A displaced factory worker has valuable skills that can be used in many different jobs where there are today vacancies. Now, much is already being done by governments to make it easier for people to retrain throughout their working life. There are programs that allow displaced workers to receive EI while they're retraining. Grants and loans are available for people who want to become an apprentice for a trade. There are tax credits and deductions for both people and employers who start an apprenticeship. Now, no doubt, Canada's geography poses a challenge. A worker laid off in Alberta needs a lot of confidence to pull up stakes and move to Ontario for a new job, especially if their spouse already has a good job in Alberta. So perhaps more could be done to facilitate those kinds of adjustments. But more importantly, companies could take more responsibility for training their workers. Companies are best placed to know what skills they're looking for in their employees. Schools can adapt their curricula only so often. And indeed, given the pace of change that we're facing, a company that is willing to take smart graduates and then train them in-house will establish an extra competitive edge in their marketplace. After all, their competitors are finding it difficult to find the workers they need to help them grow. Now, so far, I've tried to illustrate the ways that the digital revolution is affecting the economy. It's one more factor that we at the Bank of Canada are watching closely as we set monetary policy. Now, the goal of our monetary policy is to keep inflation near the 2% midpoint of a 1 to 3% range. Notre politique monétaire maintient votre pouvoir d'achat au fil du temps. Donc, les ménages et les entreprises peuvent plus facilement faire des projets à long terme en toute confiance. Pour garder l'inflation près de la cible, nous nous servons du taux directeur pour influencer la demande. Le but visé est que l'économie tourne à un niveau proche des limites de sa capacité. Quand ces limites sont dépassées, l'inflation a tendance à augmenter. À l'inverse, quand l'économie tourne en deçà de ses limites, l'inflation a tendance à baisser. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that that's an exact science. The economy's capacity is estimated. It's estimated based on our understanding of the number of workers available, their productivity. Productivity, in turn, depends on investments by companies, and of course can rise significantly when new technology is deployed. Our economic models are saying that the economy is operating essentially right around capacity now. And the recent behavior of inflation backs this up. Our core measures of inflation have been trending very close to 2%, which is what you would expect from an economy operating at capacity. The latest inflation reading was above our target at 2.8%. But 0.5 percentage points of that came from the temporary impact of higher gasoline costs, and 0.3 points came from the cost of air travel, which should also affect inflation only temporarily. Still, there's a great deal of uncertainty about the state of the economy and the prospects for growth and inflation, and digital disruption is adding to that uncertainty. So let me explain how. First, technological improvements can directly affect prices and inflation. We know that e-commerce is changing the ways that companies set prices. This is the so-called Amazon effect, as technology makes it easier for consumers and businesses to compare prices. It's more competitive. While common sense tells you that this effect is happening, it hasn't been easy to measure it. So this adds a layer of uncertainty to our inflation outlook. More fundamental, however, is the way that digital technology is changing total supply and demand in the economy. So, for example, consider a company that is planning to expand. Traditionally, you would expect this company to make investments, such as the construction of a new building or the purchase of machinery and equipment, or the hiring of more staff. But today, this investment might take on whole new forms. Une entreprise peut augmenter sa puissance de calcul en se tournant vers des services d'info nuagiques, c'est-à-dire dans le cloud. plutôt qu'en achetant du matériel informatique. Une autre investira dans ses droits de propriété intellectuelle ou la requalification de ses employés. Beaucoup d'investissements se font sans doute, mais les statistiques économiques ne le montrent pas forcément comme avant. In short, new digital technologies are making it harder to accurately measure the components of supply and demand. And our ability to measure the impact of digital technology is constantly playing catch-up with the technology itself. Now, this is not just true for investment. It's also becoming more complicated to measure how much households spend and import. Digital technology makes it easier than ever to make purchases online from anywhere in the world. Now, when I was a teenager, buying albums, yes, we did have record players by then. Buying albums for my record collection, it was easy to determine the cost of the purchases and to say whether they were imports or not. But it's much more complicated today when people download digital music purchased from iTunes or stream songs from Spotify. The point is that the emergence of new technologies is another source of uncertainty at a time when the bank is trying to get a handle on many others. We're still assessing how new guidelines for mortgage lending are affecting the housing market. We believe the economy has become more sensitive to higher interest rates, given the accumulation of household debt, but we're not actually sure how much. And we can't know to what extent the NAFTA negotiations and global trade policy uncertainty are slowing business investment decisions. Now, in the face of such uncertainties, we cannot operate monetary policy mechanically. Rather, policy becomes a matter of risk management. We must assess carefully the upside and the downside risks to the outlook for inflation and decide how best to manage and balance those risks. So today, we continue to judge that higher interest rates will be warranted to achieve our inflation target. And we know that if we move too slowly to raise interest rates, the economy could move firmly above its capacity limits, and inflation could establish significant momentum. We certainly want to avoid this outcome. At the same time, there are risks in the other direction. In particular, new digital technologies could be giving the economy more room to grow before inflation pressures emerge. And raising interest rates too quickly could choke off this economic growth unnecessarily. So this situation makes monetary policy decidedly data dependent. And of course, being uncertain about the future does not justify inaction. It doesn't mean keeping interest rates on hold until inflation momentum begins to build. What it does mean is that we will move rates toward a more neutral level gradually, continuously updating our judgment on these key issues in real time. La situation rend la politique monétaire résolument dépendante des données. Bien sûr, les incertitudes quant à l'avenir ne justifient pas l'inaction. Elle ne signifie pas que nous allons maintenir les taux d'intérêt à leur niveau actuel jusqu'à ce que l'inflation soit sur le point de s'emballer. Elle signifie plutôt que nous allons amener ces taux graduellement vers un niveau plus neutre, en révisant en temps réel notre jugement sur ces questions fondamentales. Well, it's time for me to conclude. I hope I've shown you why technological advances represent opportunities to be seized, not a force to be resisted. Of course, we must always remember that the associated disruption will be difficult for people whose jobs are directly affected. However, we know that in the long term, these advances will create more jobs than are lost and create enough income to ensure that those who are affected can adapt and access new opportunities. J'espère que j'ai réussi à montrer que les progrès technologiques représentent des occasions à saisir et non une force à laquelle résister. Nous devons toujours garder à l'esprit que les bouleversements qui en découlent sont difficiles à vivre pour les gens touchés. Cependant, nous savons qu'à long terme, il y aura plus d'emplois créés que d'emplois perdus et que les revenus augmenteront assez pour que ceux qui sont touchés par la transformation technologique arrivent à s'adapter et à profiter des nouvelles occasions. Digital disruption is also posing challenges to the Bank of Canada as we conduct monetary policy. It's adding more layers of uncertainty at a critical time in the economic cycle. Given all the uncertainty, the bank will continue to follow a gradual approach to raising interest rates and remain dependent on incoming data and other sources of information to guide our decisions. I thank you very much.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
No.
Oui, ça va. OK, c'est la période de questions. On a à peu près 15 minutes. Donc, je vous encourage d'attendre pour le micro pour qu'on puisse vous entendre. Ça fait que we have about 15 minutes for questions. So, just make sure you wait for the microphone to get to you, right? So, who's going to be the first one? Oh, I'm sure we have courageous soul in the room. All right, all the way to the back.
Okay. If it helps, Peter Wright told me he would pay me $1 for each question that I got tonight.
Good evening, Mr. Poloz. My name is Daniel Primo. I'm chairman for Habitat for Humanity.
Hello,
Nice
Dan.
to you, Steve.
How are you?
Very well, thank
Good.
you. I'd like to focus on the NAFTA angle of your presentation. We know that in the last 20 years, Canada's dependency on U.S. trade has diminished, even though it's still our major trading partner. Given the current negotiation, how realistic would it be for Canadians to expand markets other than the U.S. and reduce our dependency on U.S. trade? Thank you very much.
Sure. So Dan and I go back to EDC days. Been a while. So look, it's true that Canada's, let's call it dependence on the United States, has been trending down in these last probably 15 years or so. And that's of course because we're developing markets in other places, and no doubt the free trade deal with Europe is going to add to that momentum, and the trade deal for the Asian, the Asian 11 or 12, whatever it is going to help too. And so all that just means, though, it's not about walking away from the U.S. market. It means that the source of growth of new opportunities is likely to come from somewhere else, especially in the environment we find ourselves in today. These are long-term trends, and I'm hopeful that this period we're in today will also prove temporary, where the uncertainty is so high. So personally, I'm optimistic that, first of all, that growth will happen in other areas, and secondly, that we'll reach an agreement and that NAFTA in some form will, again, give us clarity on how we do business. So with those two things, I think we're going to be always trade dependent. We're considering the size of our economy. We can't simply forget about trade. We have to put everything into trade and developing that. So in the end, Dan, I think we should be optimistic about that. The world continues to grow and to develop and produce brand new places for us to explore and serve. And there's examples right here in the room, which I'm sure you know. Thank you for your question. I see another hand over here.
Robert Irving, J.D. Irving, here in New Brunswick. Just like to ask you and get your insight on the Canadian dollar. We know it plays a big role in this region. How you view the Canadian dollar in the next 12 months?
Okay, who's got the next question? Yeah, that's a $5 question, Peter. That's exactly what that is. So, obviously, in the old EDC days, I might have answered that question a little differently, but nowadays, I really don't offer up forecasts for the Canadian dollar. But what I think, the things that drive the Canadian dollar around really haven't changed. The Canadian dollar remains highly correlated with global oil prices. It's still highly correlated with interest rate differentials between Canada and the United States. And therefore, of course, it's driven by movement of the U.S. dollar relative to the rest of the world. So you really only need to know those three things, and you forecast them out a year from now, and then you know what the Canadian dollar should be a year from now. And so that's just a mechanical exercise, Robert. I know I don't actually have to do that. But you know, I think the main things to bear in mind is that even though you might go through a couple of months and you'll read articles in the paper that say the correlation between the dollar and oil prices has broken down. You know, it might break down for a few weeks because something else is going on. That's just a reminder that there's multiple things that can drive the Canadian dollar around, and when one of them is moving, it's the thing that moves it. When other things aren't moving, they aren't. And so if oil prices are stable for 6 months, then the Canadian dollar could be stable, or it could react to something else. And you need to understand all those things to be able to form a judgment about whether you should be hedging over the next 12 months or not, that kind of business decision. And I'm really afraid I can't help you with that, except to help you understand what the fundamentals are. They haven't actually changed. They're still the same ones that they always were. Thanks for your question, because that was worth $5. That was a beaut. So.
Il y avait une autre question over here. There was somebody else.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments and feedback. My name is Mark Landry, and I work for the City of Moncton. As you mentioned, the Canadian economy is doing very well, growing at 2% per year on average. And one of the realities we face in New Brunswick is we're not growing at that rate necessarily. Any thoughts or things for us to consider as we look at our province and want to make sure that we're at that national average?
Yeah, well, that's, you know, in Canada is always like this. My metaphor is that Canada always has its head in the oven and its feet in the freezer. You know, on average, it looks about right, but it's not that comfortable. And so, and one of the things that means is that monetary policy looks, you know, bizarre to almost everybody. Like no one thinks it makes sense to them. But that's the way we are. We have to think about the average or the aggregate economy and how it's doing. And as I said, it's operating at potential. I mean, the unemployment rate is like 40-year low. Inflation's on target. So everything's pretty lined up, and we're just saying that interest rates need to gradually move higher to complete that picture. But how New Brunswick fares through that will depend on New Brunswick's relative fundamentals. So I talked about some tonight, which are promising emerging areas. Those are the sorts of things that are growing faster than that average. But of course, there's other things that can hold it back. And, you know, trade uncertainty would be one of them, right? And so I remain hopeful that the trade uncertainty will dissipate. And when that happens, you know, those things that are holding back investment or holding back trade in general could go away fairly rapidly. In our modeling, the economy is believed to be operating well below where it otherwise would without the trade uncertainty, like around NAFTA and the global, let's call it what it is, trade war. Okay, so those things are holding back investments and new expansions of business and employment opportunities. So we've modeled that in, and we believe, of course, if the uncertainties dissipate, that so will those brakes that are on growth right now. The unfortunate part is that as this goes on, some decisions have to be taken. So decisions get taken, and they don't come up again next week. They come up again maybe in 5 years. So those decisions go the wrong way, perhaps because of the uncertainty, and that's unfortunate because that's a permanent cost of the uncertainty. So we're dealing with things as best we can. Despite all that, the economy seems to be doing okay. As you say, around 2%. It could be doing better, and especially if the supply side that I've discussed, the technological deployment, can boost the potential growth rate, the capacity growth rate of the economy at this stage of the business cycle. This is usually when it happens, and right now it seems to be happening, but not as much as we thought it would because of that uncertainty. But it could be unleashed if things go well, and we get what economists call animal spirits unleashed again, which is exciting. Boy, in economics, there's not much that's more exciting than unleashing animal spirits, believe me. So I'll leave it at that for that question. Did I see another hand? I'm not sure if I thought I did. because we're only up to like $8 here. So here we
Okay,
go.
Stephen, right in the front. I have a follow-up NAFTA question.
NAFTA, yeah.
Assuming that Canada and the U.S. can reach a deal, and that might be a big assumption considering recent comments, what aspects of a new deal would the Bank of Canada look at as key to potentially influencing interest rates and monetary policy?
Right. So we offered up some analysis of this in the July monetary policy report, so I can kind of refer back to that, and we'll be bringing some more of that to the table in the October report, which is just beginning work on that now. Fact is, first of all, we only analyze things that are factual, actual announced things. So people are often asking me, well, what if this and what if that? And we don't tend to answer those questions because it just brings, hypotheticals into the headlines, and that's the last thing we need. But I think that what has happened so far, the main channel actually has been this one I've described, which is less investment in Canada than otherwise would be the case. So you get NAFTA signed, investment spending should pick up. I mean, it wouldn't be overnight, but it would gather more momentum. And that would feed the supply side and give us a longer period of non-inflationary growth, which is very positive. If it goes the other way, you get the opposite, especially if, what people have analyzed mainly is what happens if you go from NAFTA to no NAFTA, and they assume you go to WTO tariffs. Well, WTO tariffs, that common number is a pretty small number. It doesn't really have a big effect on things. It has a bigger effect today than it had when we first put NAFTA in place because of NAFTA, we've integrated our operations cross-border much more. So it's more disruptive now to take it away than it was disruptive when you put it in place. So that modeling exists. But what I think is more to the point is what do we get instead of NAFTA if NAFTA goes away? And so people have talked about, for example, tariffs on cars. And, like we already have tariffs on steel and aluminum. We've got them built into our forecast. Tariffs on cars is another thing that's a pretty big item in everybody's pocketbook, right? And so if the tariffs come with, countervailing measures, which is kind of the way trade actions tend to work, then what happens is you get a slowing economy because you have to go through a significant structural adjustment in the economy, but you also get rising prices because of the tariffs. And so as a central bank, you might think, well, slowing economy, normally they would be able to lower rates to kind of cushion the blow. It's like we did, for example, in the oil price collapse. But this would be quite different. It's a much more complex shock to the system. And in particular, it's very, very risky on the inflation side, that with inflation already at 2 and capacity already full, that adding, a significant tariff onto something that everybody buys could have quite an uptick in inflation. And even though we'd argue that it should be temporary, it could be large enough that, it's hard to ignore. As it can affect people's expectations long term about inflation. So I can't say how it would turn out, but I just say that all those ingredients make it very complicated for a central bank. You think you ought to be able to cut rates, but if inflation is rising that much, maybe you should be raising rates. So it's a very caught between a rock and a hard place, the worst place for a central bank to be. When push comes to shove, our mandate is clear. It's about inflation. Okay. So I think the analysis kind of leads you in the wrong direction compared to what most people assume. So if I've confused the hell out of you, then we're good. But seriously, it is a very difficult question to ask. But the way it leans is towards fighting inflation as opposed to trying to cushion the blow. Yeah, but that's just a risk assessment at this stage. And let's hope it doesn't come to that. I think we all hope that, and we're optimistic. My friend Ian Smith has a question, and I've got one over here.
Just a quick question, Rodney from Royal Bank. I'd like to just maybe get a follow-up conversation around the digitalization of the industry, and you're absolutely right. It is creating a huge amount of opportunities, and we're seeing a huge amount of new jobs being created with a higher income, and that's certainly generating a spin-off in the economy. I'd like to maybe focus our attention on those individuals that are losing their jobs because of that technologically enhanced version of the economy that we're seeing, and mainly focused on those individuals, maybe dual family earning individuals, where one person has lost their job, the other person has a fairly decent paying job, and because of the vastness across Canada, we have it's a huge country. And you're absolutely right. You have some territories, some areas where you're going to see that in that technological advancement, and you're going to see a huge amount of jobs being lost. But then there's certain areas across country where there's a huge demand for jobs, and I see it all the time. I talk with a lot of business owners, a lot of heads of provinces and cities, and we're seeing that there's a demand. We're looking for people all the time. I guess my question for you is, how can the federal, provincial, local government, business owners, how can we work together to facilitate that thought process of actually uprooting a family from one area to move them to another area where there's a potential that there's some great jobs over there, but again, one potential family member has to sacrifice and actually uproot the potential family. So I think that is probably an area where we need to have some really good guidance and strong leadership on how we actually move forward on that side.
Sure, I agree completely, and that's, I obviously touched on that in my talk, that I'm suggesting that that could be an important part of our problem. That geography is an important part of our problem. And we know when we needed a lot of people up in Fort Mac, next thing you know, you've got commuter flights happening between Newfoundland and Fort Mac, and I'd be in Pearson Airport and I'd see all these folks heading out. It's just that became a way of life. That's kind of, it's gone, right? It's almost completely gone because of what's happened to us on the price side. But the point is that we know that it can work in this way. It has worked like that in the past. It's meant that the economy has adjusted more rapidly to fluctuations in oil prices than it ever used to. Okay, so there's something that we did there that did a pretty good job. But more generally, I'm not an expert on these kinds of government policies, nor is it really my purview. But I'm suggesting that some more thought go into the very problem that you're posing that makes it a little easier for people to be mobile. So we look at the performance of Germany's labor market by comparison, and it seems to run like a top. And I think mainly the reason is because you're never more than about a 2 or a 3 hour commute from the next job opportunity. It's just so much more compact, and the transportation network is superb, right? So in that sense, that explains maybe a lot. But they also have the best in-house training programs in the world. Okay, so they recruit people that seem to be smart and then teach them how to do their job, as opposed to hoping that somebody's going to show up and fill that job vacancy directly. So I think that in terms of sharing the burden of employee training, the Germans are far ahead of us, and the companies are taking more responsibility for it than is happening in Canada. And I know you can give me lots of counterexamples, because I know them too. Okay, so there are companies that are investing heavily in their employees, I get it. But as a society, we tend to wait for we can't fill this vacancy. Well, really, and if you're one of those displaced people, you got your experience operating machinery and equipment, stuff like this. Well, those skills are transferable to lots of places. And if you're being displaced by technology, and the people are still buying houses and stuff, well, just go and try and get somebody to do a renovation at your house. Like it's a really tight market. Like there's 14,000 job vacancies. Well, this is why. And those folks ought to be able to make a decent transition there. And that's a very local market. There's houses in every market, and construction and renovation and maintenance and all those things. I hear stories about people in the retail business, losing their jobs because of online shopping. Well, how many jobs now are there people just delivering that stuff to your house, right? So it's a similar sort of job, and the skill sets are not, you're not writing code. You're able to train into those jobs. So anyway, I come across as too optimistic, perhaps, but I think geography is not the main thing. I think the big thing is that youths are going out and finding they're not already suited to the jobs that are on offer. So.
Merci. We're going to have one more question.
Yeah.
Good evening, Governor Poloz.
Good evening, Ian.
Thank you for giving of your valuable time to be here this evening.
Delighted.
So I want to bring us back to NAFTA for a moment, and if you believe what the Americans are not supposed to be doing, which is negotiating in the media, they're saying it really comes down to two things: dispute resolution and supply management.
Yes.
Now, I only came back to Canada 8 years ago, but I remember going through supply management, was undergraduate in economics at McGill back in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And, here we are in 2018, and supply management, a very politically charged subject.
Yeah.
From the bank's point of view, how should the average Canadian think about supply management and what it means to the Canadian economy, and how big a give-up is it for us in these NAFTA negotiations?
Well, you put your finger on it when you said it's a politically charged subject, and that makes it less likely a subject of interest to the central bank. So we have to end on a question like that. I'd like to give a gangbuster answer to my last question. But I think, of course, supply management has been a part of Canadian fabric for generations, and it's if you go back to the days before supply management, you had incredible cycles in family incomes and so on in the agricultural sector, and so that brought a lot of stability to these folks. It's not without cost, of course, that. So to go any further than that is truly a political consideration, and you can analyze it objectively, and there are analyses around, like what the models tell you about what it's costing and so on. And but I really don't want to dive into that pool. I think for obvious reasons. What I can tell though is that the folks at the table are doing a really good job in a really difficult situation. And how this alters, I think you're right about the two main issues, and the dispute resolution mechanism was why we wanted a free trade agreement with the United States in the first place. It's a pretty important component. So anyway, it was under the Mexican negotiations, it was modified a bit, and so at least we know that there's scope for discussions around it. So that's why I continue to express optimism that we can find our way there. But like everybody, I was wishing it was over by now, because it is adding to uncertainty in the economy, but it's part of our way of life too. So it is certainly worth spending the time and doing our best to get it right. So anyway, we'll all watch that space with lots of interest for the next little while, and keep our fingers crossed. And as I said, I'm fundamentally optimistic about it. There's so much to be gained on both sides to getting it done and getting it right. Yeah, thanks.
Merci, Governor.
Yeah, my pleasure.